Our lifetime, most of us,
He wants to start over here. Go ahead.
in the course of our lifetime, most of us at some time or another have a transforming moment when we see something with a perspective that we had never seen before. And this happened to me in 1999 when my sister Dolly and my brother-in-law Gerald asked me to take them to Europe to visit the places where I had been during the war. They wanted to do this for their 50th wedding anniversary. Several years earlier, I had met a lady by the name of Betty Thompson. I was introduced to her by her nephew, Greg Heilman. Betty Thompson lost her first young husband on Omaha Beach on D-Day. And in a telephone conversation I had with Betty before we left for Europe, she asked whether during our stay in Normandy would we visit the grave of that young fallen soldier, Donald Weisel. I told her that we would be honored to do so. So in the fall of that year, the three of us flew to Brussels, and then we drove down to the Ardennes, the scene of the Battle of the Bulge, visited the area, met with wonderful Belgian friends. And in several previous visits, I would drive to the nearby American cemetery at Henry Chapelle, where many of my friends and comrades from my unit are buried. We then drove to Normandy, to the town of Bayeux, where we would stay. And in Bayeux, we went to a floral shop where I purchased a single red rose to place on the grave of that young fallen soldier. And then we drove to the Normandy Cemetery, which is situated on a bluff that overlooks Omaha Beach. And we were very fortunate in that we had as our guide a young lady who was very knowledgeable and very articulate. And because of the size of the cemetery, she drove us to the gravesite in her car. And she had with her a small American flag, a small French flag, and a Polaroid camera. And as we stood and knelt by the grave, she placed a flag on either side of that white marble cross. I then laid that solitary red rose on his grave. And then as she was doing this, she was telling us things about the cemetery, how there are over 9,000 young Americans buried there. But we were shocked when she told us that there were over 38 sets of brothers buried there, at least 33 sets of brothers buried side by side. And the reason that cut me to the quick was because my own dear wife lost two brothers, one in North Africa with the 1st Division, and a second one on a destroyer off of Okinawa when a twin-engine kamikaze slammed into the forward No. 1 gun turret in which he served, and nothing was found of him, even to bury. But as I had done on other visits to cemeteries, I would walk alone among the crosses and think just of how fortunate I had been. Because I know, but by the grace of God, with what happened to me in Normandy, that cemetery should be my current address. I thought again in how greatly I had been blessed with a lovely wife, blessed with 3 handsome children and 8 wonderful grandchildren. But then I multiplied 9,000 crosses times 50 years, and you come away with a staggering sum of at least 450,000 unlived years represented in that one cemetery. Imagine, at least 450,000 unlived years with all of the potential of each life and of each year. But then I wondered why it was that of all the cemeteries I had visited, especially the Henry Chapelle Cemetery, why was it that it was always the Normandy Cemetery that evoked such a deep emotional response? And finally something occurred to me. You see, that cemetery at Henry Chapelle lies in a setting of almost perfect peace and tranquility. It seems that even the birds whisper when they fly overhead. But Normandy is different. And the difference is the waves. It is the sound of the waves. It is the unrelenting sound of those waves as they wash ashore at Omaha Beach. But then I thought again of the young man whose grave we had visited. And then I thought again of my own life and of all the many, many blessings that have accrued to me in these more than 50 years. And it was then that it seemed those waves had a very powerful, a very severe, and a very personal message to me, telling me, don't you ever, ever forget the magnitude of the sacrifice that was made by just that one young man. And it was then that it seemed that each wave still carried with it all of the terror and all of the horror of the last few moments of that young man's life. And it seemed that each wave also carried with it the sound of a bell, tolling out another and another and another of his unlived years. But each succeeding wave had the painful reminder that unlike me, that young man would never have the fathomless pride of fathering a precious son or daughter. And then I saw another wave. And on its wave it bore the painful remembrance that unlike me, that young man will never know the blessings of old age. And unlike me, he will never know the pure joy of just holding and hugging and kissing a beloved grandson or granddaughter. And then I saw another wave, and on its crest were the scattered petals of a crushed rose, the painful remembrance of the anguish of the wounded and broken heart of that young loving wife that will never mend. And as those waves go sweeping in toward the shore, they each gently and reverently kiss the sands of that beach, because to me those waves also represent the tears of a nation that is weeping for its young. And the unrelenting sound of those waves is God's eternal reminder of the enormity of the price that was paid for our freedom. And I would like to cry out to all of those dear young men buried beneath those white crosses. You were robbed. Indeed, you were robbed of the most sublime gift that we possess. You were robbed of your very lives. But dear young men, we too were robbed. We were robbed of you. We were robbed of your love. We were robbed of your hopes and your dreams and your aspirations. And yes, dear young men, we were robbed of all those thousands of precious sons and daughters that you never even had the privilege to father, and who would have borne the very image of your greatness. And we were robbed of those thousands upon thousands of unborn grandsons and granddaughters that you will never hold, you will never hug, and you will never kiss, and they will never know the magnitude of your great sacrifice. Yes, dear young men, we were all robbed by that terrible, that insidious thief called war. But then I wondered, what more could I say to my own dear wife and to Betty Thompson, who had suffered such terrible loss, except to repeat the words to an anthem for which those young men died. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea.